All right.
Yeah, let's launch this thing off. Based on the text, how would you characterize Voltaire's view on the nature of man? And to what extent are they consistent with Rousseau's view, blah, blah, blah? What do you guys think?
Well, I said that his nature of man is like negative in the way that like he like makes the characters seem done and like dumb and senseless to their surroundings. Like Pangloss is one of the characters who like only thinks about like when he says they live in the best of possible world, meaning that even through like tragedy and violence, like it's the best thing that this could ever be, which is like kind of like like you could have like a better situation.
What you're talking about the violence, what I said is how Voltaire had that man is like innately corrupt and like born into this state of nature, man was like corrupt and violent, and then how like our education and knowledge could deform man. And I really saw this corrupt nature on page 76. It's a kind of a long quote, but Candide says, "Do you believe that men have always massacred each other as they do today, that they have always been liars, cheats, traitors, idiots, thieves, scoundrels, gluttons, drunkards," and he just goes on, and that really shows that like man is really corrupt, and I think that this reflects Voltaire's view through Candide's words.
I agree with like both like what you guys are saying, and I kind of think like he's not like contradicts himself, but he also like the guy definitely picked up like more of like a like he thought like human nature was like evil and corrupt, but like I also thought that he kind of like does put in like there are good people in the world, like if you consider like James and like the sailor, I guess, like, and so like James the Anabaptist, I guess like in chapter 5, he like, you know, saves the sailor, and then the sailor like does nothing back to help him, so it kind of like James is like a really good person, but at the same time in the end it shows how like he's showing how the sailor was like really corrupt.
I definitely think that Voltaire has an incredibly cynical attitude towards human nature, and like one of the most ironic things I found in this book is how when James saved the sailor and then he fell off, or it says, the quote is in chapter 5, it says, "Honest James ran to his assistance, hauled him up, and from the effort he made was precipitated into the sea in sight of the sailor, who left him to perish without even deigning to look at him." So that just kind of shows how no matter how good of a human you are, how like positive you are, how much you want to help people, people are motivated by self-interest and kind of return.
I think it's kind of showing. I think it's showing that like people, like some people are naturally good and they'll do good things, but like outside corruption causes other people to do bad things.
I kind of, going back to what you said, and it ties into what you said, but I talked a lot about how people are influenced so easily, and it's hard to distinguish yourself kind of from the evil. And in chapter 2, when the vulgar army discovers Candide after he's gone for a walk, it says he's given a chance to be whipped 36 times through all the regiment, or to receive at once 12 balls of lead in his brain. He mainly said that human will is free, and that he chose neither the one nor the other. And I kind of think it ties into that you really don't have a choice, so you have to choose between the better of two evils, kind of.
Like going back to what you said about how we're influenced by things, I was kind of thinking that Voltaire was saying we're negatively influenced by society, and especially like if you consider with the woman who was pretending to be Cunegonde whenever Voltaire was in Paris, the only reason why she wanted to steal those diamonds and all the money is because to society, like that was valuable. However, if you think about El Dorado, where money and diamonds were like really worthless, nobody wanted to steal that because society didn't feel that way.
That's also in line with like what Rousseau was saying, like it contradicts what Voltaire was saying, Rousseau, because he thinks that like naturally a man is pure, but also Rousseau talks a lot about how like the corruptness of civilization causes people.
Yeah, they're like exact opposites.
And I think Rousseau was saying that if we reason this out and we're educated properly, we can figure it out and make it better, where Voltaire kind of makes fun of Pangloss for doing just that. And it is the extreme with Pangloss because that's all he does, but I think that Voltaire would then disagree with Rousseau.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on the whole Pangloss thing, I think it's clear that in the book Voltaire takes the two extremes, which would be Pangloss and Martin, and kind of shows that one nor the other is, or not one nor the other is right, because obviously Pangloss, his total positive thing, like, oh, if everything's perfect, then we shouldn't do anything to progress, and that's bad. And then Martin thinks that everything's bad, so we can't even see the good things in life. And so I thought personally the entire time throughout there, he was trying to say that you got to find the perfect medium in between, and that's how you should live life.
And a lot of that is like you can't have like an exact set like black and white view on things. You have to have like the in between gray area.
And I think Pangloss takes it to the extreme of, he later relates it back to Columbus in chapter 4. Like if Columbus had never landed on America, like he epitomizes taking things to the extreme.
Well, I was kind of pointing out how, like, Voltaire said, like, I mean, I guess you guys were saying how, like, trying to find, like, a happy medium, like, between, like, optimistic and, like, pessimistic views, but I definitely between, like, him and Rousseau, like, he's definitely more, like, the pessimistic figure, I guess, versus Rousseau's more, like, the optimist, because, like, he's, like, into, like, natural right and stuff, and how, like, man is good, versus, like, Voltaire kind of focuses on, like, the evil, I guess.
And since you're talking about Martin, you guys have to remember too.
Yeah.
So what purpose did Martin serve in the novel?
Well, I kind of thought that, I looked at it from the beginning of the book. He showed us Pangloss, which made us feel kind of good, like, oh, the world's great, like, this is a great philosophy to live by. And then he shows how this is awful and terrible, and like, how many things could go wrong when you believe the world is perfect. And then he introduces Martin at the end to kind of balance it out and show us the complete other spectrum, where although we can't think positive all the time, we shouldn't think negative all the time. And like one major flaw that I saw with Martin's philosophy, I actually used the same quote that Emily said for the first question, where do you believe, said Candide, that men have always massacred each other as they do today, that they have always been liars, cheats, traitors, etc., etc. And then Martin goes on to say, do you believe that hawks have always eaten pigeons when they have found him? And then Candide said, yes, without a doubt. And then Candide says, there's a vast deal of difference for free will. And so like it kind of goes on to say that this whole pessimistic view, you can't use these literal comparisons because humans have the power of free will and like in human nature to make ourselves better.
Yeah. Like relating it, well, like Nick said, that like I feel like Martin was kind of like a rain check on Candide's philosophy, or I guess like Pangloss' philosophy, because like Pangloss had like such a positive like philosophy that Candide follows, and Martin's is like the complete opposite. And Caroline said that like one of the quotes that I used for this one was that like if Columbus is an island, like we would, when Columbus found the island, and which brought us like chocolate, and this like says that like Pangloss theory is like if there's like no trouble in the world, and which is like a flaw in like Pangloss's, but it's like, or with like Martin believes the opposite, I guess.
It's also kind of going off what Lindsay said, it's interesting, because I kind of found that like Candide kind of like Martin almost like inspires in a way, like it just makes Candide like realize like how his life's not as bad. Like he literally had a kind of a contest to see like who had the worst life, I guess. And then like there's a quote in chapter 20 on page 81. It says, Candide, however, had one advantage over Martin. He still hoped to see Miss Candide once more, whereas the poor philosopher had nothing to hope for. So it's kind of showing how like Candide like realizes that like at least he has someone, like he doesn't have nothing. So it's almost like Martin's like the ultimate like negative lifestyle, like pessimistic.
Yeah, there's a quote on chapter 20 that's, I'm pretty sure it's a couple sentences off from yours. Martin says, even in those cities which seem to enjoy peace, it's on page 100, even in those cities which seem to enjoy peace and where the arts flourish, the inhabitants are devoured by more envy, care, and uneasiness than they are experienced by a besieged town. Secret griefs are more cruel than public calamities. In a world I have seen so much and experienced so much that I am a, how do you pronounce that, Manichean? Manichean, yeah. And so that kind of shows us his philosophy on how, because such bad things has happened to him, that he pretty much thinks that's how the entire world works, and that's how like everyone's philosophy should be.
And like being a Manichaeist, he thinks that God is just a man in the world, there's no good. And also, say, for an example for like the flaws in his philosophy, I talked about how whenever Candide is in for Cambocco in Venice, and Martin says to him on page 88, he says, you certainly are naive to imagine that half-bred valet with 5 or 6 million in his pocket will go find a mistress at the end of the world and bring her here to you in Venice.
And look what he did.
Yeah, but at the end he did. And then also on page 92, Martin says how Candy's talking about how he's so excited to find coming on, and then Martin says that I hope she'll make you happy someday, but I strongly doubt it. But if you think about it, even though like coming on herself does not make Martin happy, because we know he's all, Candy happy, because whenever he finds her, she's all like fat and disgusting, and he's not so happy with her. But then in the end, if you think about it, the journey that got him to her and everything that happened because of her did make him happy. And in the end, he found this place, but we wouldn't see it as happy, but Candy was.
Mark.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, on page 88, Martin kind of talks about like Alvarado, or talks about, he says, Martin was not very confident. Candide's melancholy increased, and Martin was constantly proving to him that there was little virtue or happiness in the world, except perhaps in El Dorado, where no one could go. And this is like kind of like a vague example, I guess, but like it kind of talks about how like Martin believes that there's only happiness in El Dorado and like nowhere else, but really eventually they kind of realize like that's not necessarily true, especially with Candide, because he like realizes that he's like not with his loved one or whatever. So like I think it just kind of shows that like because Martin was so focused on like the wrong, it kind of blocked him from like what was actually right. You know?
Yeah,
I think. Oh.
Well, like that's what I talked about how like his view that the world's so terrible, how it kind of blocks him, like you said, how it kind of restricts him from seeing the good, because like he's always expecting the bad. If you're always expecting the bad, you may never see the good in him. So maybe that's why he also has that.
So you could say Martin's really inflexible.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a flaw that both Martin and Pangloss have, is that they cannot see that there would be any good, or they cannot see that there would be any bad. So when Candide asks Martin if, like, but there is some good in the world, like, can't you see it? He replies, perhaps so, but I haven't seen it. So do you guys think seeing is believing, or you can believe something without experiencing it?
Well, you have to have some sort of skepticism in your life, or else you'll be too much like Pangloss and you won't be able to progress.
I think there was like what Voltaire was like doing with these two characters is he was like saying like two examples and hoping that like Candide would get like the middle of them both. Like being exposed to all these, you could see like how Pangloss's theory like didn't help Pangloss, but then how Martin's theory, like having the two extremes, like didn't help either. So like Candide like was like experienced both, and so I think that's what helped like him progress throughout the world, is like being exposed to both.
And like having those two extremes of like Pangloss and Martin, do you guys think that since he showed both sides of the spectrum, do you think he was like intending to make one of them look worse over the other to support his philosophy? Like what do you guys think about that?
Well, I think what I said earlier is he's trying to tell us that we need to find the medium in between, because if we're too much like Pangloss, you won't progress. If you're too much like Martin, you can't live your life, because that's just an awful way to live, so pessimistically. And you just gotta find the middle, and that's how you should live.
Yeah, I think it goes back and forth like throughout the book about like, you know, like pessimism and like optimism, and kind of like shows like the pros and cons of each side. I think it also kind of talks about like, I think it just boils down to like the reason that Martin has his reasoning is like because of his experiences and like all the hardships he's gone through, and like well obviously, but like I think it just shows that like how much of an impact that does have. And like think about Pangloss, like he didn't go through the same things. And I think it's just kind of like, even though Martin is like really extreme, you kind of give him some slack, I guess, because like everything he's gone
I
through.
think it's important to note though that Pangloss did like get syphilis and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
It's really
Like,
shows like
also, I guess like going kind of off what Eugenia said, you think about like Martin's life wasn't originally like so like awful, I guess. Like he was like married. It just happened that like at some point like everyone left him, and so that kind of made him like that like impact like negative like what happened in his life just kind of made him have this outlook. And so when he says like he's never experienced like happiness and like good things in the world, like it's kind of interesting because like it makes you wonder if like he's actually like content with his life before.
I was just going to say, so in Voltaire's opinion, which of the following was the utopia that men sought? I personally think, we kind of brushed over this a little bit, Candide was not super, I mean, like, obviously he was clearly happy because they just were raining gold everywhere, like it was such a perfect place to live, but he didn't think El Dorado was a utopia because he didn't have his loved one, or like, you know, what really makes his life complete. Sure, you could shower him with all the goods and the, like, you know, like the perfect life essentially, but he like it's not his utopia until he finds what he actually wants, you know, which is kind of going.
I think that shows that like a utopia is for an individual, not for, it's not like like I was saying online how.
Like a designated place.
Yeah, it's not like a uniform thing, it's more of like a mental thing, like how a lot of times like with the Keat and then the Roots, I think it was, how like they had all this money, but they still weren't even happy. But it was more like they found happiness just working in their garden, like working on their own talents, like on page 113. I think that shows like whenever Voltaire said that they're working on their own talents, that kind of suggests that like every person is working on something individually, and like utopia is for an individual, and it's not even working in society.
And I think that it was hard for everyone to see the good in El Dorado because it says that everything which served the needs of man was pleasing to the sight. So even if it wasn't, it looked good in theory, but then carried out, it really wasn't all it was cracked up to
Like
be.
in Candide in chapter 18, he said, "I own, my friend, once more, that this castle was, or where I was born is nothing in comparison with this, but after all, Miss Cunningham is not here." So like, although this is perfect, I'm still missing something.
Right. Everything's different.
Okay, you go.
Yeah, you can go.
Going back to kind of what Emily said on page 113, he says like each began to exercise his own talents. So it kind of going back to what Emily said about being an individual, like everyone was able to like kind of go their own way and like do what made them happy. And I think it kind of showed that like El Dorado was kind of focused on just like material stuff and like not really the natural things that make you happy. And I think Voltaire kind of emphasized that with like Candide and like not being with his loved one and like that being the only like truth that matters, I guess.
Yeah, I was kind of like, I was kind of like thinking like it kind of depends what man's goal is. Like, because for Candide, like obviously he wasn't like happy, or that wasn't his utopia because like his loved one wasn't there. But maybe for someone who just like likes an easy life. I mean, I guess like I would personally, you know, like if there's no like if you're not exactly happy because everything's so easy, they would maybe want to live there. But like it just depends what your goal is in life.
I guess like going off what Dinah said, I said El Dorado was a utopia because although it wasn't like the Candid utopia, it says like what men sought after, and so like it just kind of depends on like what what men wanted. But I said that like there's a quote that says, "I'm sensible that my kingdom is a small place, but when a person is comfortably settled in one place, he shall abide there. I have not the right to demand strain. It is tyranny which neither our manners nor our law permits. All men are free." And this is like the king talking to Candide about El Dorado. He says that like making laws and making people follow them is not right. So like I thought that El Dorado was a utopia, but
So like the flaw that I kind of saw with El Dorado being utopia is that like although obviously like I mean it is in a sense of like all the money and everything, but like on page 62 how I think he was the old man who was in El Dorado, he says how with the consent of the nation, they as the founders of the El Dorado ordained that no inhabitant of our little kingdom shall ever leave it, and that's what has preserved our innocence and happiness. And I think that shows that the only reason why El Dorado like would seem like a utopia is because it's cut off to all society. So it's not really realistic to be utopia, and nobody can even have it.
Right.
It's kind of like the 1% mentality of the United States, or you know, or like capitalism, how there's just like 1% of people who are completely super successful. But I feel like my modern day connection to this utopia, and to prove that El Dorado isn't the perfect utopia, is because like look in third world countries where you see these poor, starving African children who are still super happy and ecstatic just because they have their family and their parents, and
Right.
they live with each other in harmony, rather than like greedy capitalists in America who can still not be happy after making billions.
Yeah, the less you have, the more you appreciate what you have.
Exactly.
Do you guys want to do the last one?
Yeah, just to brush it
Yeah.
really fast. So yeah, what references of satire did you choose, and why did you describe them?
well, for the one like I said that the Lisbon earthquake was like affected by Pangloss's theory because he says that the world has to be perfect, and like how could it be perfect if a natural disaster did happen, like the earthquake? So that was like one flaw that I found.
And also I think like
No, go ahead.
And also I think with like the earthquake and about how you said how can the world be perfect, like there's so many flaws. I think also you should look at like not what happened but also the outcome of what happened, because like the same thing with I think like the other group had talked about this quote on page 24 about how if Columbus hadn't come to America, then we wouldn't have chocolate and like this color would die. And that just seems ridiculous to think that like all these people had gotten syphilis and gotten this disease, and hundreds of people, like 10,000 people died. Oh, but it was all worth it because. But it was all worth it because we now have chocolate. Like that just seems so ridiculous, and like that doesn't make any sense to say that.
And it makes his Henning Boss's optimism look ridiculous when he's talking instead of helping people.
Exactly.
And like even Candide is just begging him to help, like free him from under whatever he's under, and he's just talking about
The world is perfect.
right
Why
how
should
the
I
world is
change
perfect
anything,
when
you know?
everyone's struggling.
Cool.